and there's not any questions, then they'll generally issue a license, and then at the next board meeting, you'll see a list of licensees, and those licensees will be approved.
But again, that is not what the state code says right now, correct? That's in contradiction of SB 192, is that correct?
It's my recollection, and I don't have it in front of me, that it does not preclude the director from issuing the license. There was language that was inserted in the statute, my recollection.
Can I ask the examiner's opinion on that? Can I ask your opinion on that? Is that okay? Please go ahead.
So I listened to Mr. Bledsoe's comments, and I couldn't disagree with him more for the simple fact that this board was enacted back in 1996. And the legislature is never deemed, I can pull up 100 Supreme Court cases right now in Alabama, the legislature is never deemed to act in vain. Okay? And so the legislature came numerous times since 1996, in 2000 and 2007 and 2011, and it didn't give them that power. These boards, these commissions are a creature of the legislature. If you don't have the power, you can't act. Regardless of whether it would be nice to, you have to have the authority. And so the legislature gave them that authority. In Act 2022-408, they specifically granted the executive director the authority to grant a license. The very next year, the legislature came back. Again, they're never deemed to act in vain, and they struck through. All of the members on this Sunset Committee are intimately familiar with when you strike through language in an act, you intend them to no longer have that power. And that's exactly what happened in 2023-490. If you pull up that bill on Allison, it's stricken through. And so I don't understand how logically, from a legal perspective, from a logical sense perspective, that this legislature struck that authority, that ability, how you could argue or whether there would be a need to ask for an AG's opinion about whether or not the executive director still has that authority.
Excuse me, let me
Straightforward.
just put a pin right there. You asked the Attorney General's opinion, but the person standing before us is with the AG's office. Am I missing something?
Be with it and see if this is correct. Is he with the AG's office, but just not acting in that capacity on this board? I'm confused with that.
Yes, I'm at the Attorney General's office, but I'm in the Civil and Administrative Law Division. So we have a separate division that does opinions, and then we've got
Okay.
criminal divisions, we got criminal appeal divisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming and explaining that for me. I appreciate it. Mr. Bledsoe, I'm going to say one thing as far as emails and that you didn't know about Lieutenant Beam's information. I've got 4 emails in front of me.
Hold on. They haven't finished addressing my issues.
Yeah,
Please-
let's stay with Senator Coleman Madison.
Please forgive me. I'm sorry about that, Senator.
Okay.
So the other concerns regarding the conflict of interest, I think, is another bone of contention. And so what we did with that matter was there was a complaint filed. The complaints, of course, are investigated. We have an investigative committee. They are all identified by a complaint number from the very beginning. So when this matter, after it was investigated and the investigative committee was presenting their recommendation to the board, we do not identify anyone at all with the complaints. In the process of presenting the investigative committee recommendations for this particular case, the vice chair, who also is the chair of the IC committee, was the one that handled the vote, the presentation and the vote on the complaint, and then the chair. What we did not do was specifically state that the chair abstained from the vote. we have a policy through the Robert's Rules of Order that the chair only votes in the matter of a tie. So that is our fault for not specifically stating that the chair did not vote on that matter. But the chair did not have anything to do with the vote and presentation of that case to the board. Yes, ma'am.
What was next on your list, Senator Coleman Madison? I think you had another issue.
Issuing licenses to people who had not met requirements.
So we have not done that. So in fact, I'm going to jump back over here to Senator Gudger's issue because we pulled all the background checks for those individuals and none of those active warrants even show up on their background check. So if their background check is clear and they've met all the requirements, then there's nothing for us to go on to deny that license. And so moving forward, all of those applications now will be presented to the board, and we will pull our application review proposal. So every one of those applications will now be reviewed by the board at their quarterly meetings. So they can see all of the requirements that have been met. So they've met the educational requirement, the examination requirement, the insurance requirement, and the background history check. So all of those will now go before the board. So those that did have criminal history, those are the ones that would go to the board for review. But we'll stop all that, and all applications now will go before the board for them to review individually. But I might add, if the criminal history background check is clear, then there's nothing for the board to hold them back on denying that license.
Unless there's a complaint filed by anyone in the general public, a licensee, or somebody on your board that you know of, then you would inspect that, correct, and probably suspend that license until you had a hearing.
Our investigators have been working with the Coleman Police Department as well as inspecting that facility anytime they're in the area. So that's what we're doing in that matter.
Okay, and the last thing, if someone just, and Keith, we've had this before, you're familiar with it, this is, and it may be, this is a continuing emergency contracts. And maybe there's a reason for it. I don't know, we're just wondering. It's not an emergency if it's continuing.
Correct. That is not something that I like either, actually, as a business person. So, proposals for these contracts were not bid, and that dates back to probably around 2020. The prior, when it was the purchasing division, that director is the one that initiated the initial emergency contracts for the services to continue. Those have been extended through the law being changed by you in October, effective October the 1st. The procedures for the request for proposals for these services were issued along with the instructions in March, and all of these proposals are either finalized and contracts going to contract review, or they're in the proposal process now. So those will go away after we conduct all of these final requests for proposals that just started in March of 2023.
Senator Coleman Madison, you have any other questions? Representative Simpson.
Here's my concern, and I'm piggybacking on Senator Gudger on this issue, because I've had the opportunity to speak to Lieutenant Beams as well. There is a general feeling of hopelessness by board members that they can't do anything that they're supposed to do. They're afraid their name is going to get dragged through the mud just by being on the board. And when they try to do things to correct it, when they try to do things, they run into a stone wall. It's not just the board members, and you look at the questionnaires that came through, you see these responses from the board. It's the massage therapists themselves. There is a lack of confidence in this board. There is a lack of confidence in the way this is being handled and what is being done, and we can find every possible, thing to run around in circles about solutions, but when people are actually trying to correct it and trying to make a difference and trying to make sure that places like Senator Gudger's district is safe, they're running into roadblocks coming from the board. And that's just unacceptable.
It is unacceptable, and we do have circumstances where the establishment closed and they send in other individuals that meet the licensing criteria and open right back up. We did have the opportunity to have added in the 2018 legislation that is, if a location by address is identified as an illicit massage business or a human trafficking business, then a business cannot reopen in that same facility. So that's hopefully where we're headed in this matter.
May I speak, Mr. Chairman, or somebody else? I think my biggest issue of that whole deal is that the person still has a license, number one, even though we can't find them. They should have been suspended by now through time. Even if you had your hearing in 120 days, it's been, 750 days approximately now. Still hasn't had anything happen with that, and the establishment is still conducting business there. If there was a complaint, it says very, very clearly in the code and also in this book that is y'all's purpose, is to keep public safety number one. So you do have the opportunity to suspend or revoke in doing that. I know we talked about, y'all didn't know anything about the resignation of Lieutenant Beams, and I get 1,000 emails too, but both of you are copied on 4 emails that I've gotten from him on July 13th, 9:42, 9:43, 2:13, and 3:12 with the rest of the people that are on their staff, the investigators. So I'm gonna give you benefit of the doubt saying I get a lot of emails and don't see them a lot of times too, because that was all right there together in one day, but you definitely had emails stating that there was issues 2 months prior to him putting in his resignation.
And we did respond to him and provide him all of those application informations, background check information, as well as TLO reports. So,
Go Chair.
How many, I notice you have currently, or in this report, 3,179, and then you've mentioned that you have done suspensions and revocations and surrenders. How many a year have you suspended or revoked?
very few, because we're very successful in the consent agreements, especially when they surrender their license.
All right, how many surrenders have you had?
We have probably had 10 to 10, at least 10 surrender of licenses this year. And all of those are reported in the actions, of course, on our disciplinary report on the website. So we are successful. We would rather the license be surrendered than to go through the hearing process. So we do try to encourage them to go ahead and surrender their license, which negates any other, not negates, but if they come back and operate, of course, that would go, they wouldn't be issued.
Or the revocations?
Boundary issues, sexual crimes on their background checks, if they are caught operating, having other therapists operate in the facility that are not licensed, but they're responsible for, those type of issues.
And then, we've talked about, y'all said IMBs, so internet massage businesses. Illicit, I'm sorry. I was trying to get that definition down. And then in the talks, that seems to be the worst crime committing group in this field. Yet I've almost gotten a feeling that y'all throwing up your hands on that. So correct my impression, please.
Yes, ma'am. So when we stopped doing our own undercover operations years ago, and we were advised to do that. So we will work with the local police department, sheriff's department, or whatever to go in and do various stings. And sometimes there are actually clients caught with the therapist in doing those acts, and we're successful in getting turning those over to the law enforcement agents to prosecute for those things that they have committed there, and then we will go and suspend or not reissue that establishment license. So it's kind of dual-fold. We do a lot of work with local law enforcement. They do a lot of sting operations with the local law enforcement and such. And so, and all of my investigators, all three of them, are highly involved in that case in Coleman, especially with the sergeant there. So,
Hold on. Can I interrupt here?
Yeah, take over.
All three of your investigators are highly involved in what happened in Coleman?
Mhm.
But you can't find a witness that would be willing to testify at your hearing?
Mm-hmm.
Where are your investigators?
I think we just went through that a few minutes ago.
No, before it was the DA's office and the Attorney General's office was the problem, because the Attorney General's office didn't want to pursue, so you couldn't prosecute because the Attorney General's office didn't want to, the Attorney General's office didn't want to share the file with other members of the Attorney General's office, so they didn't know who the witnesses are. So then you blamed it on the Shelby County prosecutors, or whoever the county prosecutors were, and said, well, they didn't want my officers to testify. Well, now you're saying your investigators were heavily involved with what happened there, and you still can't find a witness that would be able to hold up in court to make sure that that person doesn't get renew their license?
Heavily involved in communication with the officers, not in whatever was conducted there in the city of Coleman. No.
I think I understood that the sting happened an hour and a half or so before.
Prior to our investigators showing up. So, yes.
All right, members, any other questions, comments, concerns? We've got some folks here that have signed up to speak, and we'll get to that, but we'll certainly, go ahead. Well, let's take all the questions now, and then we'll have some public comment.
Okay, mine is a optics of financials on, I'd requested, because I wasn't here last year when all that was done, so we just were seeing the effects of the prior significant issues, that sort of thing. So I'd asked for the financials for the last 4 or 5 years, and so there was a steady decline in ending balances, of cash reserves. In fact, in 2021, it got down to $432. And then in 21-22, so I'm asking you this, just clear up optics for futures. In 21-22, the professional occupational board penalties went from typical $5,000, $8,000 a year to $94,350, and coming off that low one, I think it'd be good if you could just say, well, here's what that was, instead of some people making assumptions of it being such a large amount, all in 1 year. And you might not have that data with you today, but
I'll provide it to you, but I can
Yeah.
answer some of that.
okay, that's cool.
There were not a lot of fines or consents entered during the COVID period. And then we also we're looking more closely at the type of complaints coming in and the type of violations that we were seeing. And so then we came up with a criteria, especially for inspections,
A new criteria.
and set fines for any violation on the inspection report.
Okay.
So we revised all of that. So there are reasons why those fines increased.
Okay, yeah, this started back in 2017, so yeah, I was just asking clear up optics on that.
Yes, sir.
Members, any more questions, comments, concerns right now before we get to the public comment section? Okay. Today we have signed up to speak two folks from the public. Christy Williams. Ms. Williams, are you here? Okay. We've got a request from a board member to take Ms. Patricia McKay first. I'm sorry, Ms. Williams, if you don't mind holding, just give us just a minute. We're going to hear from Ms. McKay. Ms. McKay, thank you for joining us today. I'm grateful. I know the committee is anxious to hear your comments, and unfortunately, we're going to limit it, and we're going to limit it to 3 minutes.
Okay. I'll hopefully be okay with that. Good afternoon. My name is Patricia McKay, and I am the chair of the Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force, as well as the chair of the North Alabama. Be okay with that. Good afternoon. My name is Patricia McKay, and I am the chair of the Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force, as well as the chair of the North Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force. For the past 14 years, I have worked diligently across this state to raise awareness, provide training, and facilitate collaboration with various Alabama groups regarding human trafficking in hopes of ending these horrible crimes. I'm always open to conversation and assistance with any board of massage therapy member, or any other board for that matter, to discuss aspects of human trafficking, arrange and discuss available training options, and provide input, guidance, or information on the issue of human trafficking. However, in the 9 years since the Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force has been in existence, and in the over 11 and a half years the North Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force has been in existence, I have not received a single phone call, email, or text from the executive director of this board or anyone else from this board. Illicit massage establishments have been on our state's radar, as well as mine, for several years. The Board of Massage Therapy should be the key to keeping massage customers safe and without incidents by following the laws and regulations intended for issuing licenses to those who are qualified, investigating and reporting any and all illegal situations to law enforcement, and staying abreast of human trafficking laws, trends, and practices as they relate to massage establishments. However, this has not been the case under this board. I have learned in recent months that illicit activity has occurred on more than one occasion in massage establishments across Alabama. It is my understanding, too, that under this administration, these activities occur, are, quote, investigated, but are not being reported to local, state, or federal law enforcement. It is also my understanding that when these incidents are not reported to law enforcement, no case can be brought against the perpetrators to find justice and rectification for the victims. I have learned in recent months also that Mr. Warren has stated that the Board of Massage Therapy Investigators are, quote, participating in the Human Trafficking Task Force for the Southern Region. Now, this is concerning to me because there's not a group that's named that. The correct name of the task force that I think he's referring to is the Southern District U.S. Attorney's Task Force Against Human Trafficking. Two, the task force with even a similar name would be that one. And it's interesting to me that he's not even referring it to the actual name. That particular task force is in Mobile. Why wouldn't he attend the Alabama human trafficking, or the investigators attend in Montgomery where the Alabama task force meets? In reviewing the Massage Therapy Board's website, although there are 3 references to human trafficking related information provided on the website, it is sketchy at best and potentially misleading or out of date. The information gives the impression of board participation with no evidence to validate those claims. The first reference is a link to the Alabama Human Trafficking Task Force.
Ms. McKay, I hate to cut you off, and we've gone over a little bit. Certainly,
Okay.
the board members the committee members will be able to ask you questions if they desire to.
Sorry.
And members, do y'all want to ask any questions of her? Okay, all right. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Next up, we've got Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams, if you'll come up and you'll have 3 minutes and, yes, sir.
I wonder, it looks like you have a prepared statement there that the lady was reading. Could we get a copy of that?
If she desires that, we'll certainly distribute that, get copies made, and send it to the members. Ms. McKay. Ms. Williams, thank you for being here.
Thank you. I have a quick request before I start my time, if you don't mind, and it's to do with the Administrative Procedures Act. I would like to just, for 2 seconds, just jump on that for just a minute before we start it. I'm not an attorney. I rub backs. But I will tell you that the Administrative Procedures Act in this state is very clear of how licenses can be addressed. It's being done in other states and not here. So just please look into that. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm ready.
Go right ahead.
So I've learned the hard way through this that in order to make change, you got to be tough. Luckily, I'm from Winston County, Alabama. It has been a privilege to play a small part in the 4 executive orders signed by the governor, and to stand here under the new attitude of sunset is an honor. I'd like to leave you with a few statements to consider as you deliberate our board in your action meeting later this afternoon. This will determine the future for my ability to earn a living in this state. First, please remember that these behaviors by Mr. Warren are not in any way new. 3 decades of intentional violations takes planning and calculation. The great philosopher Plato once said that good people do not need laws to tell them how to act responsibly, while bad people will find any way around the law. So I ask you, what type of person uses the excuse, "No one told me to stop," for law violations? Next, these board members were made aware of the severe conditions of our agency. Y'all know I like to send emails. They got some emails. They were very well aware of this, and I personally notified each member, and I was reprimanded in a board meeting on August the 5th because a particular board member's system was overloaded. I was ignored, ridiculed, defamed, and blamed for these issues. These board members, they are educated, they own schools, and they're business owners. These are grown adults. This is not all Mr. Warren's fault. If you're going to serve on a board, you look at your stuff and you get it right. The end. Right? Well, we all make mistakes. There is education allowed for these boards through LSA, free education. We all know that. Anthony Latham told me that himself. Why aren't we pursuing it? You don't have to wait on your executive director. You're his boss. At the end of the day, I'm going to close with this. They fought back so hard in this last legislative session that Senator Gudger was forced to draft a backup bill because they advocated to sunset their own agency. Ignorance does not justify incompetence when you're over my livelihood. That bill from Senator Gudger, I beg this committee to look at SB 350 as the modification for this board so that we can rectify 30 years of issues. And there are applications waiting in the governor's office to reappoint. They expire on the 30th. Mason has them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. We appreciate that. Committee members, any questions, comments, concerns? All right.